You wake suddenly. For a brief moment, there is awareness without a story. No name, no plans, no explanation, just presence. A body oriented in space. A point of view without a biography. Then the story rushes back in. Who you are. What today means. What's expected of you. That gap matters because it reveals something we usually miss. The self does not arrive all at once. There is a self that is lived and a self that is told. Most confusion about the self, scientific and personal, comes from treating those two as the same thing. The first layer of selfhood is what philosophers call the minimal self. This is not a personality. It's not an identity. It's not the story you tell about yourself. It's the simple fact that experience is for someone, that sights, sounds, sensations, and movements show up from a single point of view. You don't usually notice this self, not because it's hidden, but because it's too close. It's what you live from, not what you look at. It shows up most clearly in basic moments: pain before explanation, balance while walking, the flinch before thought catches up. This self is embodied. It's shaped by posture, movement, breathing, and orientation. Your body isn't something you merely own. It's the medium through which anything appears at all. And crucially, this self is pre-reflective. You don't have to think, "This is happening to me," for it to already be happening to you. The minimal self isn't constructed. It isn't narrated. It's found. Whenever experience is simply underway, there is another layer of selfhood. The one we usually mean when we say "me," end quote. This is the narrative self. The self made of memory, anticipation, and explanation. It answers different questions. Who am I? How did I get here? What kind of person is this? This self is built from stories. Stories we tell ourselves, and stories we learn to tell for others. It's shaped by language, culture, and expectation. By roles we occupy, by the past we remember, and the future we imagine. This narrative self is powerful. It gives coherence to a life. It allows responsibility, continuity, and meaning. But it's also fragile. It depends on memory, on social recognition, on things going roughly according to plan. And because it feels rich and articulate, we tend to mistake it for the whole self. That mistake is where many problems begin. One of the clearest ways to see the layers of selfhood is to watch what happens when they come apart. In certain breakdowns, stress, illness, depersonalization, people don't lose consciousness. They don't lose perception. They don't disappear. What often disappears instead is the familiar sense of ownership. People describe it carefully. I see, but it doesn't feel like me. I act, but without authorship. I'm here, but not someone. What's striking is what remains. There is still orientation, still sensation, still a point of view. Experience continues, but without the usual narrative glue that tells us something precise. The minimal self persists, even when the narrative self falters. Breakdown doesn't destroy the self, it separates its layers. And that separation lets us see what is usually fused together. Neurophenomenology doesn't ask which self is real. It asks which layer we're talking about right now. The minimal self and the narrative self aren't two substances. They're two organizational levels of the same living system. The minimal self tends to track ongoing bodily regulation, movement, sensation, balance, breathing, orientation. The narrative self tends to track memory, anticipation, social modeling, and the stories that make a life coherent over time. The mistake is to look for the self in a single place. A region, a center, a module. There is no self area. What there are instead are dynamic patterns, different processes stabilizing different layers of experience. Neurophenomenology works by keeping experience and mechanism in step. First, describe the structure of experience carefully, then ask what kinds of processes could sustain it. not replacement. Constraint. Most of the time, the two layers of selfhood cooperate. The lived self gives immediacy. The narrative self gives continuity. But modern life often asks the narrative self to do too much, to manage identity, performance, explanation, and meaning all at once. When that happens, the story grows louder, and the lived self grows thin. Stress, burnout, and anxiety don't usually begin with the loss of presence. They begin with the loss of contact, when experience is no longer allowed to simply be underway. Understanding that the self has layers doesn't dissolve responsibility or meaning. It clarifies where strain is coming from. And it sets up the next question. If the self is layered, then when we act, who is acting? That's where we go next. Ownership and agency